And let me just check for advancing. I'll just walk back to the computer to do it.
So I'm going to start real quick. Thanks everyone for coming today. Our first meeting of the 14-15 season. We have a special guest today. He's the hard work and time and the effort of Lake High School website. His name is Dr. Jim Moeller. He is a board-certified sports medicine specialist and a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine. He served as the chief medical officer for the 2010 U.S. Olympic team, as well as the U.S. Olympic speed skating team position in 2006. He is a clinical associate professor of health sciences at Open University and is a team physician for the United States speed skating. Dr. Moeller has written numerous sports medicine-related journal articles and has been the editor of two sports medicine books. Dr. Moeller also serves as a team physician for Troy Athens, as well as Bloomfield Hills Losser and Andover High School. We've asked Dr. Moeller to come in and kind of talk to us about my focus personally is to focus on how do we train or how do we prepare our athletes pre and post game. This past season I had some rehab done on my left knee along with the other girls in soccer. And all of them had knee issues or hip issues or ankle issues. So talking with physical therapists, they kind of led me to the belief that we should be doing some more or some other things to help get these girls prepared to play sports and boys for that area as well. So talking with Lisa Hart about the situation, how we feel about the situation in the Dr. Moeller, and we're honored to have you here to give us a little presentation on what we're doing.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Lisa and I have known each other since middle school. And it's no longer Bloomfield Losser High School and Bloomfield Andover High School. It's Bloomfield Hills High School now, which is kind of odd for the two of us since we're alumni of Losser High, which is no more. I was a soccer player too, just so you guys know it's not all speed skating for me. I was never a speed skater, hockey player. I started playing soccer so I could get in better shape for hockey. My buddies played soccer, a bunch of fun guys, and I didn't particularly enjoy football in the fall. And back when I was a kid, you played a fall sport in the fall, you played a winter sport in the winter, you played a spring sport in the spring, you had the summer to have some fun, which probably still isn't a bad idea for most kids. But yeah, that's how I started playing soccer, and as it turned out, I ended up playing varsity ball at a little university in East Lansing, Michigan for a while too. Didn't make the hockey team, they really made the soccer team, which was interesting, but what the heck. I have a lot of experience with soccer players and the game itself, and I had 3 daughters who played, and my practice is dedicated to sports medicine. I was trained in general medicine, everything from surgeries to delivering babies to taking care of newborns to people in their 90s and 100s and end-of-life situations and such, but it's not what I enjoyed. What I enjoyed was taking care of active people, so went ahead and did my fellowship training in sports medicine, and that's what I practice. I have a private office at the corner of 16 and Woodward. The building on the southeast corner, everybody knows it is the Eddie Merlot building, the steakhouse there on the corner. We want Eddie Merlot to be recognized as being in the Sports Medicine Associates building someday, but we just moved there, so dream big, start small, I guess. What Lisa asked me to talk about were these things here: stretching, warm-up, cool-down, strength training, some injury ideas. But I threw this last one as when to see a doctor, because that's the thing for me is I often see kids way too late. When things are so far gone that now it's going to take 3-4 times as long to get them better and back to where they want to be than what it would have been had I seen them early on. And so I want to give you some ideas of when to make recommendations for your players as to when they should really go in and see somebody. And again, I'm not saying that they have to come and see someone like me, but you know, again, I do sports medicine only. They're pediatricians, they're family docs, they're internists that will take care of some age groups of kids. But there's a time where it seems appropriate, and there's a time where waiting may be okay as well, and we want to go over some of those things. So let's start with the stretching and warm-up. Why do you want to do it? Does anybody have an idea of why we want to do this at all? You touched on it a second ago. You get kids getting hurt. You don't want kids getting hurt, so injury prevention is one thing. But as coaches, what else are you looking for out of it? You want them to play better, don't you? You're looking for performance improvement. And really those are going to be the two big things that you're looking for from a warm-up program and a stretch program. The thing is, the science on stretching is really poor. most science now shows that more stretching injures kids than it helps them, because it's been done wrong for decades. Again, I'll just go back to my own experience, because I'm probably the oldest person in the room. And you know, we did traditional stretching. Stand there, stretch. Put your hand on your teammate so you don't fall over. Static stretching. And why do we do it? Because it was tradition. You get there early so you can stretch. Okay? And we did what was called static stretching. Now, there are several kinds of stretching: static, dynamic, ballistic. There's something called proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is actually a great stretch, but it's a tandem stretch, 2 people, and both people have to know how to do it. So I left it off here because it actually takes a lot of training to learn how to do it correctly. But I've just got a couple of slides here talking about the different kinds of stretching. A static stretch, you stand there and you make a muscle get longer. Okay? So stand, both knees straight, bend down, touch your toes. It's a hamstring stretch. It's a static hamstring stretch. There's really very little motion involved in it to really get to the point of the muscle getting to length. What's been found through studies over the last 10 years is this may be one of the most harmful stretches pre-workout that there is. And I'll give you some examples as to why that may be. Dynamic stretching, you're actually taking the muscle through a range of motion to get it to the stretch point in a gentle fashion. People will call this dynamic stretching or dynamic warm-up. And it's like scissor kicks, arm circles, lunge walking. You get in that lunge position, and trunk rotation when you're in the lunge position. You can even incorporate it into some of your aerobic warm-up with jogging and high knee running, and we call them butt kickers. I'm still sure you still call it that. We actually call it something else, but I don't know you folks well enough to get into what we used to call it. But anyway, the dynamic stretch has actually been shown to be potentially a very beneficial style of stretching. And it's very simple, and it's safe for all age groups. Because that's another thing you have to think about when you're talking about stretching. There are certain kinds of stretches that are better for certain age groups than others, and certain levels of understanding of your body than others, which brings us to ballistic stretching, which everybody's been taught is just a horrible way to stretch, the bouncing stretch. Where you bounce into the position, you come out of it, you bounce into the position, you come out of it, and you do it over and over again. And the reason that's considered a potentially irritable stretch is that you have these things in your muscles that react to being stretched, okay? Called Golgi tendon apparatus. And what happens is when they get stretched, they send a reflex signal to your spinal cord that makes that muscle contract. So what's happening is as you're bouncing back up and that muscle's contracting in reflex to the stretch, you're trying to stretch it again. So you have the muscle going that way, and you have the stretch going that way, and the muscle and tendon is like a rope in a tug of war. And that's when it can get damaged. And that's why ballistic stretching can be harmful, potentially. Now, very well educated athlete who understands their body particularly well, who is highly trained, can actually utilize this stretch as a building tool and as a warm-up tool. But I wouldn't recommend it in youth for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is, again, it's kind of hard to get it right. There's the potential for injury. And kids' muscles and tendons connect to very delicate structures. Structures that are more delicate than the muscles and tendons themselves. We'll get into that a little bit later. But again, ballistic stretching is not something I would recommend for this age group, because this is 12 to 18, correct? 8 to 18? Okay, better still. More reason to probably stay away from ballistic stretching. This proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or we call it PNF for short because it's a lot easier to say, is a situation where you have a partner and the partner pushes you into a stretch position. And when you're at that point of feeling the pull in the muscle that's appropriate, again, so it takes an educated athlete to understand when they feel the pull but not pain, the person who's being stretched actually contracts the muscle into their partner. And then at the end of that contraction, the partner takes them into a deeper stretch. They can get greater length in the muscle tendon units with that. It can actually be a building process as well as a warm-up process. But again, it takes 2 people that understand what they're doing. And it's really kind of difficult. In fact, I know a lot of physical therapists who I don't think do it correctly, and that's what they're trained in part in. So I have them avoid PNF in some instances, because again, it's just very difficult to understand how to do it properly. So what's the benefit? Because that's what you're looking for. How is this stuff going to help our kids, and is it going to help with performance? Is it going to help with injury prevention? Well, dynamic stretching has been studied pretty widely in the last 10 years, because as soon as they found that static stretching probably wasn't so good, everybody started to study dynamic stretching and dynamic warm-up. And what they found was that in soccer players particularly, if you just take them and measure their athletic ability with regards to vertical jump and some speed testing, in the morning it's worse than it is in the afternoon. These are kids, of course. They want, a lot of things are worse in the morning than in the afternoon with these guys. But particularly when it came to performance, certain things were found to be not as good in the afternoon. And dynamic warm-up was found to counteract the decrease in performance with certain morning activities. So to take that time to do a dynamic warm-up showed to be helpful in performance. Well, that's a good thing, because you guys play all your games in the afternoons? Tournament games start at what time? 8? 7:30 sometimes? Oh, dark early? When the kid's really kind of sleepy, kind of groggy, performance may be down just because naturally the diurnal rhythm of their ability to participate and perform changes. Dynamic warm-up can wake those muscles up and actually help them with performance. It's also been shown that dynamic stretching in combination with progressive aerobic warm-up can be beneficial in reducing injury. Now, FIFA started to study this with regards to soccer warm-up, and they came up with a very specific warm-up plan for soccer players called the FIFA 11 Plus. And what it does is it takes jogging and running, progressive speed work basically, includes dynamic stretching, some strengthening activities, some balance, what we call proprioceptive activities. We can have a proprioceptive little game if you want later, show you guys how good your balance is or how poor your balance is. But we know that proprioception, the brain's ability to figure out where the body is in space, if you can improve that, you can reduce the likelihood of injury. So we include balance, and again, more progressive aerobic activities. What they found was that this 20-minute soccer-specific warm-up benefited not only in performance but in injury prevention. If you go on the FIFA website, you can download the FIFA 11 Plus. Now, this has been studied and validated for 14 years and higher. So for the 8-year-olds to the 13-year-olds, we don't know that this is really going to do the same things as it does for the older age groups. It's only been validated from 14 up, okay? But looking at the FIFA 11, there's very little in it that would be medically considered dangerous for the younger age groups. It takes about 20 minutes to do this. So I would check that out and see how does your warm-up compare to what FIFA has actually studied widely and diligently and found to be beneficial. Okay, the FIFA 11 Plus. We'll come back to that in our recap area because it's an important thing I want you to remember. Dynamic warm-up has been shown to increase hamstring flexibility and quad strength compared to static warm-up. So that's another thing that's important. It has been shown that kids with higher hamstring tightness ratios, less flexibility, may be at greater risk for certain kinds of injuries. Depending on the age group, we're not talking hamstring injuries. We'll again get into this a little bit later. As you get older, you're more likely to injure muscle and tendon. But when we're talking about the 8, 12, 14, even 16-year-old kids, the hamstring attaches to a bone, the bone you're all sitting on right now, your ischial tuberosities. And the ischial tuberosity growth area is actually weaker than the muscle and tendon. And so what I'm going to try to impress upon you a little bit later is when that kid gets that hamstring pull, it's more likely a bone injury. And the tighter the hamstrings, the greater the chance that they may cause an injury to that bone. As they get older and the bone gets more mature and relatively stronger than the muscle and tendon, so now the muscle tendon is the weak link, that's when muscle strain starts to become more problematic. Okay? So again, we'll get back to that type of injury in just a few minutes. But improving these things is helpful. Now we've got to be a little bit careful because of this part right here. The quad strength part. Anterior cruciate ligament injuries in soccer is an epidemic, especially female soccer. Depending on which study you read, women are 4 to 8 times more likely to tear their ACLs playing soccer than boys. And when we study these things, the reason soccer is one of the sports that we look at is because boys and girls both play soccer under the same rules. Basketball, under the same rules. Okay, so we can only really compare easily if we've got kids playing like sports. And so basketball and soccer get a bum rap when it comes to the ACL data, because those are two sports in which boys and girls participate under the same rule system. Okay, and so 4 to 8 times more likely. One of the problems, one of the risk factors for women tearing their ACLs more than men is their quad strength. They tend to be what we call quad dominant. So when you look at the muscles of the thigh, the quadricep and the hamstring, just make it easy, front and back. Their quadricep is significantly stronger than their hamstring. Guys are close to a 1-to-1 ratio. Close, not exactly, but pretty close. Women, much stronger quadricep to hamstring. Quadricep fires, it pulls on and creates tension in the ACL. And so what you want is you want to make sure that you try to equal out the strength by doing hamstring strengthening exercises so you have less tension on the ACL and reduce that risk. There are a lot more risk factors than just quad dominance. We can get into that in the Q&A session at the end if you wish, but there are multiple factors involved. There's not one thing that puts women at higher risk than men. But one of the things is that quad strength. So we do have to be careful that while we're doing all these things and working on dynamic warm-up to prevent certain kinds of injuries and to improve performance, that we want to make sure that we're doing other things to counteract some of the positive gains. Because again, quad strength is a good thing in a soccer player. But if they become so quad dominant that it puts their ACL at risk, we really didn't help them that much. So we do have to also work on strengthening other parts. Okay? Does that make sense? So let's talk about static stretching. I already tried to convince you just that it's probably not such a great idea, but scientifically what we've seen is that in multiple studies, various age groups, multiple sports, male and female, not really a great injury preventer. And because it's done incorrectly, often ballistically, instead of true sense, may be more harmful. If you static stretch prior to a workout, you decrease your muscle strength. Because you pull these fibers past each other so hard that they can't really cross-link and contract well anymore. And they have to recover from the stretch in order to be able to create the power that you wanted it to utilize for your activity. So for up to 24 hours after a static stretching program, explosive performance and repeat sprint ability in soccer players has been shown to decrease after static stretching. Not really what you want when you're putting a kid on a soccer field. You want them to bust by that kid on the wing and get down and cut in and try to get a ball into the middle, right? So again, the static stretching can actually hinder performance for up to 24 hours. Again, another reason that we don't really want to use it, not only potential injury causation, but performance. Again, we found that lower extremity injury is potentially higher, and depending on the age group, the types of injuries change. And again, that's due to skeletal maturity. Again, ballistic, hard to perform correctly. You need an educated athlete, you need a skeletally mature athlete. Probably not a great choice. Again, that's that bouncing stretch. So the bottom line, dynamic warm-up, which includes aerobic, it includes dynamic stretching, it includes strength, it includes body position sense, proprioceptive training, all in an effort to increase performance, which is what coaches want to see for sure, but also decrease the risk of injury, which everyone wants to see. Any questions on the stretching, on that stretching part and warm-up part? Again, I refer you to the FIFA 11 Plus, especially if you have a 14 and older age group team. I can't do any better research than what FIFA did. Yes, sir.
A lot of the kids that I've coached and coach, especially when you're dealing with older girls, they seem to like to stretch a lot. And even when you do your dynamic stretch, you do all your dynamic stuff, and then you're saying, right, you're ready to go, they'll say, well, can we spend 5 minutes to stretch? So after listening to that, it's no. But that's what they seem to think they need to do.
Yeah, again, that's more traditional than it is scientific. Now, there is some science that shows that in certain places static stretching can be helpful, and one of those is if you've had an injury before and you're trying to prevent the repeat injury, there are some static stretches that may be of benefit. And so even though we don't recommend static stretching in someone who's never been injured in a particular area, if you have a young woman on your team who came back from a calf injury 4 months ago, and you do the full warm-up, and she wants to take a few extra minutes to stretch the calves specifically, probably a reasonable thing to do. Because again, we're not talking about a previously uninjured person, we're talking about reducing the risk of re-injury. And the biggest risk factor for muscle strain injury is prior muscle strain of the same area. I mean, it's kind of from the medical journal, duh. I mean, it just makes sense that if you've been hurt in a place before, you're more likely to get hurt in that place again. Because when muscle heals, it doesn't necessarily heal exactly to the way it looked and acted prior to the original injury. Maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit scarred, maybe a little bit tighter, and never really get back to that full 100%. And so again, re-injury is high risk, especially hamstring, hip flexor, and adductor. Those are particular areas where recurrence is extremely high. So those kids who've had a previous injury, it may not be a bad idea to let them take those extra few minutes. Kids who've never had a problem before, not necessary. Again, it's more tradition than anything. I try to convince them, get through the warm-up and get going. So strengthening, yes sir?
So our team practice typically twice a week, and we have games typically once a week, so we're together 3 times a week. Is it important to switch up routine, the warm-up routine, or is it okay to use the same routine?
It's okay to use the same warm-up routine. Again, what we're trying to accomplish with that is just getting blood flowing to the muscles that are going to be used mostly during that exercise and make sure that we reduce the risk of injury to those muscle groups. And to use that same warm-up is not going to be a bad thing. We're not doing strength building like this, where mixing it up may be beneficial. Mixing up your practices is not a bad idea. But these are general large muscle action warm-ups, and so you're not going to overwork an area from the warm-up itself. Whereas if you do the same workout routine all the time and you do the same practice routine all the time, the muscle memory for that doesn't necessarily allow for the spontaneous differences that may take place in the game. So mixing up those workouts is beneficial. But these are just kind of general large group activities to get the blood pumping to the area and to get some extra length in the muscles for, again, performance and injury prevention. So using the same one every time is okay to do. Now, strengthening in young kids has got a bad rap for a long time. I can't lift weights. It's going to stunt your growth. How many were told that when you were a kid? Yeah, it's going to stunt your growth. You can't lift weights. You're going to tear up your muscles. You're going to rupture a tendon. You're going to break a bone. You're going to whatever. Lies, lies, lies. Okay? That's true. The science has shown clearly that weight training, even in young kids, is safe as long as it's done in a correct manner. You can say that for most things. It's probably, again, not a earth-shattering revelation, but if it's done correctly, strength training, even in young kids, skeletally immature kids, safe to do. Well, kids aren't going to get strong by lifting weights. Well, that's baloney too. They will. And you can prevent certain kinds of injuries by being stronger. And you can improve performance by being stronger. And so there's nothing wrong with a weight training program or a strength training program in kids. It has to be structured, it has to be supervised, it has to be done in a correct fashion. That's where the problems come in, because it's hard to get that supervision and hard to get that structure. So kids before puberty, how do they get stronger? They don't get bigger, they don't get muscle bound. I always used Arnold Schwarzenegger. I got to find a new person because the kids these days, they have no idea why are you talking about the governor of California? They don't get that. So I got to find. Does everybody have anyone? The Rock? Yeah. I was trying to think like Flex Wheeler or something like that. That was the name of a bodybuilder, actually, Flex Wheeler. But they don't build by hypertrophy, muscle size growth. They get stronger by recruitment. And the way I put this to kids is this. If I need to move a couch, and I have 10 friends, there are 10 of us in the room, and I'm trying to move the couch, and I'm the only guy moving it, it's going to be hard for me. But if I recruit some more of you to help me out, it's going to be easier to move that couch. We're going to be stronger for 4 of us or 5 of us or 6 of us to do it than if just one of us is trying to do it. You have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of muscle fibers in your body. If as a kid you're only using 15% of them to perform a task, you can only create so much force. But by weight training, you can teach 25% of the muscles to get involved, 50% of the muscles to get involved. So you will be able to move more resistance. You will get stronger by recruitment. Just teaching more of the muscles how to get involved for an activity. So that's how kids gain strength before puberty, is by recruitment, not by hypertrophy. Yes, there are some freak situations where kids have these protein anomalies that allow them to hypertrophy muscles. Those are few and far between. You read about those in the newspapers, and you know, the super baby in Germany. You guys hear about the super baby in Germany? Hypertrophy is enlargement of the actual muscle. So the muscle itself gets bigger. Again, here we're not getting bigger, we're just getting more of them going, okay? Atrophy would be shrinking of a muscle. So if you go into a cast because you have a broken leg and come out and your leg's really skinny, it's because the muscle atrophied. Atrophy and hypertrophy are opposite ends of the spectrum. So basically, their body gets smarter about how to do the task, not really bigger. And what they want to do is they want to do low resistance, so not a lot of weight. They want to be very strict on their form, which is why it needs to be supervised, okay? Moderate repetitions. They don't have to do, you know, high repetition. You talk about with adults, you know, you do high reps and low resistance for toning. You do low reps and high resistance for muscle building and things like that. With kids, it's just a moderate number of repetitions, 12 to 15. It doesn't have to be a lot of resistance. The form needs to be good so they don't hurt themselves in other ways. You don't want them swinging their backs into things and getting back pain because of an exercise they're trying to do for their arms or for their legs. Using machines is probably safer in kids, because until they understand how to do the activities, there's some protection about being with a machine as opposed to doing free weights. When you get older, transitioning to free weights is something that's going to be easier. You want to do large muscle groups, large movements, okay? Quadriceps, hamstrings, calves. You don't want to necessarily get into all of the different four muscles of the rotator cuff, just basic major shoulder motion, that kind of thing. After puberty, you can still gain strength by recruitment, especially if you've never lifted weights before. But that's when hypertrophy starts to kick in. Why? For guys, testosterone. Okay? They start getting testosterone pumping around in their system. Lots of things change at that moment. But one of the things is that the muscles react to resistance training by getting bigger, by hypertrophying. That's when they start to get definition in their bodies. Women will also start to get hypertrophy too, but not to the same extent as men, because women don't have as much testosterone in their system. They may have a little. They have other androgenic male hormone type of hormones releasing around their system, but not to the same degree as guys. So they're not going to hypertrophy quite as much. Again, recruitment still happens if they've never lifted before. Their body still gets smarter, but they also have this opportunity for the muscles to actually get bigger as well. That's when you get into changes into free weights and changes into higher weights if they want to actually get bigger. If they just want to get stronger though, and they don't want to really get bigger, they can stick with lower weights and higher repetitions and still get stronger without really hypertrophying a great deal. This is also a place where I like to add proprioception into the weight training itself. Again, proprioception is that body position sense situation. It does reduce injury risk. We found this from shoulder to elbow to ankle to hip to knee. If you can train your brain in how to figure out where your body is in space and actually control the muscles around that joint, you're going to protect that joint. So when I lift weights, or when I tell people to lift weights who have the understanding of free weights, I have them add proprioceptive training into it. So for example, if I'm doing bicep curls and I've got dumbbells in both hands, what I will do is I will stand on one foot and I will do my bicep curl standing on one foot. Because my brain has to keep me balanced on one leg now while I've got weights pulling me in both directions and I'm trying to do a maneuver like this. If I'm focusing on my balance, I can't lift the weight. If I'm focusing on the weight, my brain just kind of in the background has to check my balance. Okay? And this is just the simplest lower extremity proprioceptive drill you have right here. In fact, everybody get up for a second. Let's do a proprioception drill. Stand on up for me. Pick a leg to stand on. Raise the other leg up like I am. Cross your arms in front of you so your center of balance is tight into your core. Just stand there. Feel pretty steady? Little wobbly maybe, little wobbles here and there, making some fine adjustments, right? Close your eyes. Oh boy. That's a little different, isn't it? Okay? It's a lot harder for your brain to figure out where your body is in space because you lost the visual stimulation of balance. But if you work on that, you'll get better at it. Your brain will figure it out better. And as you get better at it, that communication, you can stop. You can sit down. The communication between the brain and your lower extremity is going to improve. The signal starts from the floor, goes to your brain figures out what it needs to do from a muscle firing pattern situation to get back down to the lower extremity so you don't fall over. Well, if that's going like this, you fell. If it's going like that, you're not going to fall. And so you want to train that. Okay, that's what proprioceptive training does. You see those people standing on those Swiss ball or those Bosu balls, you know, and you see them standing on the foam pads. That's all proprioceptive training. It's a little harder with the upper extremity, but we have tools for that. But I try to incorporate that into their weight training as they get older to try to kill two birds with one stone. I also like, with regards to soccer players, if you're doing just a simple square passing drill and we just want to pass right foot to right foot, what I'm going to say is I'm not going to pass to you and then come back down. I'm going to stay right here. And I'm just going to pass and I'm going to accept. So our passes better be accurate, because if you pass over here, I can't get that ball. But now I'm working on my proprioception and my reception and passing. And then I switch sides and I do the same thing. So I'm incorporating proprioceptive into some of my drill work. Basketball players, I say get under the basket at the end of practice, especially when you're tired, you're fatigued, and your brain may be a little bit out of it at that point. That's a really good time to train this. I say get under the basket, 20 shots off the glass with one foot on one foot, 20 shots off the glass on the other foot, go to the other side, do the same thing. Incorporate your proprioception training into some type of positive workout for your sport. So strength training is not bad for kids, but it's got to be done correctly. The younger they are, the more you want to use big muscle groups, big motions, machine weights, lower resistance, moderate repetitions. But you got to make sure that somebody's watching to see, who knows what they're doing, to see that they are not cheating and pulling other body parts in that could cause injury to them. And that's where the problem is. We don't have a lot of people to spend that time or to have that availability to help those kids. Yeah, that's the personal trainers don't like it. Yeah, but again, I'm just you don't have to. You can do it with a Bowflex in a garage, you know. So again, there are lots of places to be able to do that. If you don't have weights, does anybody know what a gallon of milk weighs? 8 pounds. A gallon is 8 pounds. A pint is a pound, right? 8 pints, 8 pounds. So if you don't have hand weights and you need to do some workout, fill a milk jug halfway, you got a 4-pound hand weight.
What about bands?
Bands are good too. Bands are actually great. I love them. We use them in our office and we send them home with people because they're very portable, and you can work out almost any muscle group with bands. So these are those TheraBand workout bands. They're those flat rubber bands. You can tie them in loops and hook it around a table leg. You can keep them unlooped and stand on one end. You can do lower extremity, upper extremity workouts with bands. It's a great way. It does get out of control a little bit sometimes, and so it's like free weights in that way. If they're having some difficulty with controlling the motion itself, it may be a problem. So you have to make sure that they understand the resistance move very clearly and they stay very strict to form. It's very easy to increase resistance too. So if I've got a band around this table leg right here and I'm working my adductor, if I want it tighter, I step a little further away from the table. Now I've got more resistance. If it's too much resistance, I step closer. It's a little bit easier. But bands are a great way. So injury, I'm a sports doc, so I always got to talk about injuries. If I don't bring x-rays, I feel like I haven't done anything, so I've got x-rays in here for you. There are two primary groups of musculoskeletal injuries. You have acute injury events, and you have overuse syndromes. You get smacked by someone else and bruise up on the leg, you got a quad contusion, that's an acute event. You know when it happened, you were fine, third, you were bad. Overuse injuries, overuse syndromes develop more gradually. Well, how long has it been hurting? I'm not so sure, probably about a month. So you don't remember a lightning strike event. No, I don't. So it just kind of started to hurt and it's kind of been getting worse. Yep, that's how it's going. That's a description of something that's going to be from overuse. Overuse. Too much use. Stop using it so much. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. So overuse injury is very, very common. In kids, we see a lot more of them now than we used to. Osgood-Schlatter is kind of one of the classic overuse injuries. How many of you had Osgood-Schlatter when you were a kid? You got the bump on your knee to prove it? Yeah, okay. So Osgood-Schlatter is a situation where the growth center on the front of your shin bone, the little bump there where your tendon attaches, gets irritated, swollen. You see people with the big bony bumps there. They have knee pain, usually guys around 12, 13, 14 years old, usually girls a little bit younger than that. We rarely saw it in females. We would see it, but it wasn't all that common. Now it's all the time. We see it all the time in females. Why? Because females are more involved in organized sport than they used to be. We see it more in the guys too than we used to. Why? Because not only are they still involved in organized sport like they used to be, but now they're doing the same sport all the time. They're not giving their body a curveball. Like we were talking about with, does the warm-up necessarily have to change? Not necessarily the warm-up, but the program of training sometimes needs to be mixed up. So we're seeing these things a lot more than we used to, and we're seeing some of the odd ones a lot more frequently. Osgood-Schlatter, again, that bone irritation right here, is one of several bone irritation injuries. We'll get into a couple of those in just a second. Another problem is kids are specializing in their sport real early. A paper came out by the American Medical Society of Sports Medicine, which is the biggest group of sports docs in the country, looking at burnout and overuse. And one of the things that they recommended was on sport specialization. Kids shouldn't specialize in a single sport until they're 14, 15, 16 years of age. There's actually a study that came out looking at the ability to progress into higher levels of sport participation, collegiate and professional sport participation, Olympic participation, and when kids specialize in sports. And there were 2 or 3 sports where if you specialized by 12, you got a good shot. And they're not surprising ones. Not hockey, gymnastics. Gymnastics was number 1. Because if you're not an Olympic gymnast by the time you're 16, 17, or 18, you're washed up. Right? Swimming was another one. Swimming was another one. And I can't remember, the third one was was an odd one for me. But it was something like that, It very well, could have been cricket or something like that. I don't remember what it was. But what it showed was that kids who play multiple sports until they're 14, 15, or 16 actually get a better understanding of the working of their body and the mechanics of their system and actually become better at all their sports and have a greater chance at moving forward. And even in certain sports, certain positions weren't good. Like if you want to be a baseball pitcher in the pros, don't pitch until you're in high school at the earliest. Those kids who are all pitching when they're 12 and they're the greatest pitcher on earth at 12, they never make it because their shoulders and their elbows can't take it because they start too young when they're too immature. The fact that there's no off season is difficult as well because your body needs a break, it needs to recover. And when we're talking about kids that needs to grow, so these poor kids, they're trying to grow, they're trying to do their sport, they're trying to recover from their sport, they're trying to get their homework done, they're trying not to tick off their parents too much. They got a lot of stuff going on, and they need a downtime. And it's not just, I had 3 days here, and I had 5 days here, and I had 2 days here, so that's 10 days. They need a block of time to recover. We talked about cycling, mesocycles, microcycles of training, and that's part of it. You have a preseason where there's a build-up. You peak during, hopefully by mid-season to end season, and then you have an off season, important for kids to recover. And the off season could be doing a different sport that uses different muscle groups in different ways and not really put them at risk. But these are some of the common overuse injuries we see. This is just a diagram showing where some of the growth areas in your body are. You actually have 8 growth areas in your pelvis and hip on each side, 16 growth areas in your pelvis and hip. And a lot of kids will get irritation, so when they come in and their hip flexors are a little sore. Well, they're 12. They don't get hip flexor soreness at 12. They get bone soreness at 12. Could it be a hip flexor? Yeah, it could, but 90% of the time it's going to be bone irritation. Okay, I don't have a pointer with me, but the top one, iliac crest. Oh, look at you, sweet. Look out, everybody. I'm really good with one of these. Middle button? I'm really good with one of these. If you sit still, I can take it right between your eyes, right down here, and not blind you one bit. So the top one here, the iliac crest, that's where your abdominal obliques connect into, okay? This one right here is called the anterior superior iliac spine, ASIS for short. Again, we like to shorten things because it's hard to say the long things. You have a hip flexor knee extender muscle called the sartorius muscle that attaches there, all right? And so the kid with that high hip flexor strain, got to watch out for that ASIS being a problem. And they'll be painful right on that bony bump. If you put your finger right here, you'll feel a little protruding bump. That's your ASIS, okay? You put your hand on the crest of your hip like this, that's your iliac crest. Did you find it? You guys stop it. It's certainly, yeah, it's certainly easier to feel in some people than others, guys, so yeah. This one right down here, you're not going to feel because it's deeper. It's deeper under more muscle tissue. This is called your anterior inferior iliac spine, or AIIS. In medicine, terminology, my daughter took an anatomy class last year. First class in about 4 years I could help her with, because I couldn't help her with math when she got to 8th grade, and I was done with helping her with math. But she took anatomy and physiology this year. So I'm like, yes, I can help you. I get the musculoskeletal system. I'm good with that. But anytime you hear anterior, it's because there's something in the back. There's a posterior. Anytime you hear something that's superior, it's because there's something lower or inferior. So that's how we get these names. But anyway, this one, part of your quadricep attaches to this, all right? And that's a hip flexor and knee extender as well. Out here, this is your greater trochanter. That's a bump right there. Push right on the side, you're going to feel a bone bump. That's your greater trochanter. People say, that's my hip. That's not your hip. That's your hip. That's trochanter. And the trochanter, you've got your gluteal muscles attaching there, some of them. You have your piriformis and your gemellus muscles that rotate your hip, extend your hip, and abduct your hip, all attached to that area. You have a little bump on the inside part called lesser trochanter. Can't get your fingers on it, too much muscle tissue in there, okay? Your iliopsoas muscle, a big hip flexor attaches there. Ischial tuberosity, we already talked about that one. It's the one we're all sitting on right now, except you and me. We're the only two not on our ischial tuberosities. Hamstrings attach right there. And then you have some attachments of some of your adductor or groin muscles that come in through the center here in the pubis. Because your pelvis actually has two halves to it, and they move independently of each other. It's not one big locked bowl. All right, there are 3 bones on each side, and each group of 3 moves independently. But these are areas of where you can irritate the bone and not the muscle. And the younger you are, the more likely it is to be a bone problem than a muscle problem. When we treat musculoskeletal injury, there's only ever been one statistically proven treatment that works. That's resting the injured body part. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a sprain, a strain, a break, a tear, a bruise, a cut. Staying away from that area and letting it heal is the only thing that's been proven to be helpful. And this is taking a meta-analysis of thousands of studies and hundreds of thousands of kids from the top of their head to the tip of their toe, and all injuries included. Heat? No. Ice? No. Stretching to recover? Not proven. May help some, but again, statistically, not significant. Laser therapy? Nope. Ultrasound? Nope. Electricity stimulation? Nope. Physical therapy? Nope. None of it. It doesn't mean that we don't use those things to try to help, but we don't have any proof that any of them are actually going to do the job. We want to try to train the kids, and we want to keep their body mobile. We want to try to keep it strong. We want to try to keep their brain involved with what their body's doing. But what we're also doing while we're doing all these things is we're buying time for time to heal. Because if you just also let it heal and don't do anything to keep that movement and keep that strength and keep that proprioception, the actual injury will get better, but then they can't use the body part. They forgot how to use it. So functionality is important too, and that's really what we focus on during the rehabilitation process.
When you say rest in shutting someone down, are you talking 2 weeks, 4 weeks?
Depends on the injury. All depends on the injury. Well, I'll show you some injuries that you're looking at 2 to 6 months, right off the bat. Very rare that it's less than 2 months, not uncommon to take 6. In fact, I pulled 3 x-rays today to put on this of a kid that I cleared today to start his progression back to sport 5 months after his injury. And I cleared him today.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
My 11-year-old has it starting with the left knee, now it's the right knee. Same kind of the progression I had when I was younger. I have 2 questions. One, my niece has had it, I had it. One, is it hereditary, or because it seems like my family's plagued with it, where I don't hear it as much with the other players. And the second question is, my son will go through spurts where some days he'll come home from practice and he's like perfectly fine. Some days he can't walk up the stairs, you know, and I'm just wondering, how do I gauge that, or do I pull him out at certain points? Or I was told by our doctor that it couldn't hurt any worse, but it certainly can cause more pain.
All right, let me try to address all those points because I don't think you got good advice.
Okay.
And first of all, it does tend to run in families, but we don't have like a genetic marker. We don't know that it's on the, short arm of the first X of the 15th, chromosome. We don't know that. Some problems, we know exactly what gene and where it sits to cause problems for people. We know that it runs in families, but we don't have a genetic marker for it. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is the primary treatment is going to be activity modification to a pain-free level, and they have to mature, and their bones have to mature. Because once that bone matures and locks in, you can't hurt that bone anymore. Now, if they keep doing the same activities, that stress is going to shift to somewhere. And it may shift to the patella tendon, they may get patella tendonitis or something like that. But maybe their patella tendon can take it. Right now, the patella tendon is overpowering in comparison to the bone. That's why the bone hurts, okay? But you got to make your choices based on how you feel. The problem is that you feel good, you go out and do a lot, and then the next day you pay for it. So when that day you feel good, don't go crushing it. Ease up a little bit and make sure it's still not sore, and then ease up a little bit more and make sure it's still not sore, instead of saying, hey, today's a good day, I'm just going to do as much as I can. Because that's a big mistake that people make. So you do have to make some adjustments from day to day and from week to week with it. It can get worse. We see a fair number of times, especially in Osgood Schlatter, where they play through the pain because they were told nothing bad can happen. And then when their other knee gets mature and that bone bump fuses into the main bone and can never get hurt again, the other one doesn't. And it stays out. And so when you look at an x-ray picture, you have the main bone, and then you have this glob of other bone that never fused in the way it was supposed to. And those kids, when they're 17 and 18, they say, oh, my Osgood Schlatter still hurts me. It's not Osgood Schlatter anymore. They have a chronically immature tibial tubercle, and they either need to stop their activities if they need to for pain control, or they need to have surgery to have that piece removed. So it can get worse by playing through it. So that's where I don't think the advice was necessarily accurate.
Yeah, and it's a common advice. My niece has got the same thing, the same skill with their doctors. It's just interesting.
There's a big debate right now in the sports medicine world. Should we be treating these like stress fractures and just shut people down, put them in a knee immobilizer for 6 to 8 weeks and say, just stop? But not everybody agrees. I don't agree with that yet. No one's proven the science to me quite well enough, but you can't biopsy kids' bones to figure out if it's the same thing.
I have some players that wear braces for that. I think they have the band.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of care about the rules, all that.
No, they don't work. There's no brace or band that's actually been proven to be beneficial for Osgood Schlatter. Now that being said, some kids put a band on and they go, wow, this really feels better. Let them wear the band. It's not going to hurt them to wear it, and if it's helping them, that's fine. But scientifically, there's no great brace or band for Osgood Schlatter. Those kids who put the pre-wrap around here, it's a waste of pre-wrap. That's just silly. There's not enough tension to create anything with that. There are straps that are specifically used for something called patella tendonitis. Some people call it jumper's knee. It's called a patella tendon strap. It may alter the tip of the kneecap, it may alter the pull of the patella tendon on the tibial tubercle, but it's not been scientifically proven to be of benefit. If it helps that kid, let them wear it. Say, I'm glad it helps you, I want you in that all the time. Be positively supportive of something that helps them because it drives home to them that it's a good thing, and if it helps them, that's all that really matters. When I first started out, I used to get upset if people didn't follow my advice, and then if they got better anyway, I was like, oh my God, come on, you didn't do what I told you to do, and as I've gotten older, I've been able to deal with that a little bit better. I don't care if they get better because they stood on their head in the corner for an hour every day and they think that that's what made them get better. As long as they get better really in the end, that's all that matters. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the information I gather from them to make the best diagnosis I can, and then I'm going to take my education and my experience to give them what I know to be the best path to get better. And then I turn them loose. I see them back 4 weeks later. I tell people, I'm not going to follow you around. I'm not the police. That being said, I live in Troy. And I see these kids around. And if I see them doing something I told them not to do, I will go up to them. And I'll say something to them. And I'll embarrass them in front of their friends. And, but again, I can only do so much to help you in that path. But if you find something that works for you, I'm not going to stop you from doing it. Okay? But again, scientifically, not beneficial.
The other common injury that I've seen from the 9 to 11 year olds is the bottom of the heel.
Seaver's disease. Okay, so I was talking about the Osgood-Schlatter, and in other parts of the body you have similar things going on. Seaver's disease is Osgood-Schlatter of the heel. Figured out by Dr. Seaver, who put his name on it, as opposed to Dr. Osgood and Dr. Schlatter, who each individually put their names on this and apparently thought the other guy stole the idea and hated each other. They were mortal enemies, and now they're linked forever. Island's disease. You get that kid with the side of the foot pain? There's a growth center on the side of the foot there at the base of the fifth, the outside metatarsal midfoot bone. Irritation of that's called Island's disease. Again, doctors back then, they used to put their name on everything, you know. So we got Island's disease, we got Seaver's disease, we got Osgood-Schlatter's disease. There's a growth center right at the base of your kneecap. Dr. Syndig, Dr. Larson, and Dr. Johansson named that after themselves, Syndig-Larson-Johansson disease. The mechanism to create SLJ is the same as the mechanism to create Osgood-Schlatter. Lots of quad dominant work in a young growing person. And usually growth spurts are the times where you start to see it more. It's not growing pain. Growing pain is pain because you're growing, nothing else. Usually night pain, rest pain. This is because of your activities pulling on things. So this is not growing pain even though it only happens when you're growing. Does that make sense? But kids who get Syndig-Larsen-Johansson usually get it a little bit younger than Osgood-Schlatter. They often also end up getting Osgood-Schlatter because they keep doing the same things that got them in trouble in the first place. And this matures a little bit earlier than this does. And so that it can shift. But that, you're talking about Seaver's disease. My daughter had Seaver's disease. She was a soccer player. And again, you try to make her less painful. We were lucky. I got some heel cushions, silicone heel cushions for her, put them in her cleats, she never had pain again. We didn't have to worry about anything. I didn't have to make her stretch. I didn't have to make her ice. I didn't have to make her rest, because as soon as we put the heel cushions in, her pain went away. If she's pain-free, what am I going to do? You know, I'm not going to stop you if you're pain-free. She was lucky. But again, Seaver's you're going to get somewhere between 11 and 13, maybe 14, depending on if they're early bloomers or late bloomers, even though that growth center doesn't close till they're 16, 17 years of age.
What about using ice to treat those? Does it help?
Ice helps in a number of ways. Ice decreases metabolism of the body part. It's really good with muscles and tendons and acute injuries. Bone, the metabolism really isn't going to slow down that much. It's a direct pain reliever, so that's good. It shuts down blood supply to the area. Not completely, but that's a good thing, because if you have increased blood supply, you could have increased swelling and again, increased metabolism. And so ice is good for those reasons. It's not going to cure them any faster, but it's going to make them feel better while they're getting better.
But like, for instance, like post-game or training immediately after?
There's no harm to that to try to stop delayed soreness from coming on. If they're having pain during the training, though, you got to start to shut them back, okay, until they're at a pain-free level. And if you can't get them to the pain-free level, they got to stop. That's the only way it's going to get better. So don't specialize until you're a little bit older. Recommend to your kids that they do something else too, you know, let their bodies work in different ways. It's going to make them a better soccer player if they play another sport. Young athletes should have at least 3 months away from their primary sport. I don't care what your sport is. But it can't be, well, if you add the number of days I didn't play, that came up to 3 months. I had 5 days off in August. I had 6 days off in September. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a 6-week block at the end of one season. We're talking about a 6-week block at the end of another season, or we're talking about 3 one-month blocks somewhere to let their body recuperate and recover.
What about the professional academies for soccer? I mean, they go to school, they train, they've got everything, you know, everything to make them sports specific at soccer. They don't do other sports like judo and other strength stuff within the program, but they are trained to be soccer players from age 8, you know.
Yeah, not a great idea. And the truth of the matter is most of them are not going to make it to the level that they think they're going to make it to. In part because of the early training, but in part because it just physically can't happen with a numbers game.
The kids at both Barcelona Academy and Ajax Academy are doing the wrong thing?
At the young age, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I was taking care of the U.S. women's under-19 soccer team back in the early 2000s. It was the very first time there was going to be a women's under-19 World Cup. And the U.S. won the World Cup that year, the women. in U19. And I was taken out to California to work with them for 3 weeks in their final pre-tournament gear up. And so I'm sitting there with 24 of the best under 19 female soccer players in the country, okay? And, you know, every kid who comes into my office, parents tell me they're the best kid on the team. They also tell me how much pain tolerance their kids have, which, you know, everybody has super high pain tolerance, which is a bad thing, by the way, but pain tolerance is bad. So I'm sitting there at dinner with these 24 girls. I said, okay, every kid who comes into my office who plays soccer is the best player on their team. Who's the best player on your team? 23 of them pointed at one kid. And the one kid went like this because she knew she was the best, because she didn't want to be pointed out. It turned out that 6 of them eventually made the national team. Now these are our 24 best under 19 players in the country. They won the World Cup in overtime. By the way, the girl they pointed to scored the overtime game-winning goal. She also scored 2 game-winning NCAA championship goals. She also scored the gold medal winning goal in the 2000, I want to say 4 games. Kid was a real deal. But only 6 of them actually ever made the national team. Only 2 of them actually stayed on the national team for more than 2 years. The next Mia Hamm, there wasn't. There was only one Mia Hamm. She was on the national team for how long? 14 years? Who's the local girl who was on the national team, the defender? How long was she on the team? 12 years? There's not a lot of room for these kids. And so all those kids who go to the academy, and they're doing this thing from a young age, and they're beating up their bodies in the same way over and over again, and they're getting these problems that are going on, it's to get that top 1% to the mother team. The top 1%. It's like in our sports here in the U.S. How many kids make it to collegiate Division I ball? Of all the kids who play at a young age, the top 1%. When you look at professional, it's the top 1% of the top 1%. 1 in 10,000 who actually start playing will actually ever make it to the pros. It's not a big number. And so all these kids are doing these things year-round at an early age with the thought that they're going to get to that spot. It's nice to think that, but is it really appropriate, especially at the younger ages? And I say no. I say no. I'm not a big fan of the academy idea. That's just me. That's not medical. That's just personal. I was a soccer player. I played hockey too. I played baseball too. I did all these other things. And I'm just not a big fan of it. I just think it's too much too soon. So I went to see the doctor. There's a couple of kind of really simple rules of thumb. None of this is written in stone. If a kid gets hurt, you know, if they're playing a game and get crashed into by another kid, they go on the field and they can't get up. They had a lightning strike event. They felt fine, something happened, they're in pain. If they refuse to use that body part or are unable to use the body part, they probably need to be seen. Now that sounds really stupid and really simple, doesn't it? I can't tell you how many kids I see 3 weeks after they broke their leg and they're still trying to walk on it and still trying to play on it. And the kid is walking into my office like this at 10 years old, and he still tried to play last night. If they can't use the injured body part, get them looked at. I got to be careful in how I say this. I'm not a big fan of urgent care centers for doing musculoskeletal care because I trained a lot in musculoskeletal medicine before I went into practice. And I think I'm pretty good at it. I'm not saying I'm the greatest musculoskeletal doctor in the world, but I think I'm pretty good at it. I've got 20 years experience now and a lot of training behind me. And I can't tell you how many things I see that somebody else has already seen, but it was missed, or especially in kids. Because kids are not just little adults. There's a big difference in you can't treat a kid like an adult. But, you know, call that night, get an appointment with somebody. If it's bone sticking out of the skin, get to an emergency room. That one's easy, okay? If the joint's pointing in the wrong direction, get them to an emergency room. But if they refuse to use it, give a call and get the kids in. At our office, we try to pride ourselves in getting kids in within a couple of office days. If you call on a Monday and we can't get you in Monday afternoon, we're going to try to get you in the best we can on Tuesday, just because we know everybody's a little anxious and the kids are in pain and we don't want that. If at a week, they're able to use the body part, but at a week they're still in pain after an acute injury, get it looked at. What's the harm? If nothing's wrong, except they're in pain, that's a good thing. But it's good to know. So if they're still in pain a week later, get it looked at. Okay, classic. Kid comes in 2 weeks after they pull their hamstring. They come in 2 months after they pulled their hamstring. I pulled my hamstring 2 months ago. I still can't. Every time I try to run, it hurts. What's going on? Oh, it doesn't show up terribly well. Well, it's good it doesn't show up terribly well because this was the first x-ray I took of this kid that I just cleared today. And what you don't see, or what you might see if you have really good eyes, is a little wisp right there. You see it? The main bone right there and a little wisp just outside that main bone. He ripped part of his ischial tuberosity off the main bone. He has a fracture. He separated the bones. Hamstring held, bone didn't. So here he is, a month later. Can you see it easier now? Now it's not just a little wisp. It's a fairly large piece because it's maturing and getting thicker. So here we are 2 months after that, today, in fact. Holy cow, look at the size of that thing. That looks huge. Because it matured and new bone came in, but what also happened was that gap that was there bridged with new bone. Okay? That's what it looks like when you heal an ischial tuberosity fracture. That's the kid who has that hamstring strain that doesn't get better at age 14 because he didn't strain his hamstring. He broke his bone. That's why, of course it hurts. Broken bones hurt. So again, the classic, I pulled my hamstring and they're pointing way up here. Get them looked at. I strained my quad. I was running and it felt like somebody shot me and they fell to the ground and they try to get up and it's just really painful up in here. I got quad pulled. Don't worry about it, kid. That'll be better in a couple of weeks. See that piece of bone right there? That piece of bone belongs on that piece of bone. Remember that anterior superior iliac spine we talked about? Their sartorius muscle during the kick phase of their sprint or at the time of impact with the ball, muscle holds, bone pops off. 2 months to 6 months for these to get better. For the pain to go away enough to even start jogging in most cases. A lot of times they're on crutches for a month, non-weight bearing, they're in so much discomfort. And I don't force them to walk in pain. I don't think creating pain for them is a good thing. If you have a bone injury and it hurts you to do something, you're not letting it get better. It's going to take longer. I strained my groin. Again, hitting a ball, sprinting, and gymnasts doing the splits. Well, that doesn't look right. That piece right there belongs right on that bump. See that little bump there? Should look exactly the same. So this kid ripped off his lesser trochanter of his femur. Iliopsoas muscle, big hip flexor. This kid had the most crazy reaction, bone reaction to healing that I've ever seen. Look at that. Can you see that one? It's huge. Look at this thing. He was pulled so far off that I sent him to a surgeon because I thought he needed to be pushed back and pinned back in place, and the surgeon didn't want to operate on him. Unfortunately, 6 months later, the surgeon operated on him because of this. The kid had so much pain because of this overgrowth of bone that we had to go in and have them carve out all that extra stuff. But these are some of the classic acute injuries that I see after the fact, a month later, 2 months later, because they were treated like they were adults. They're not adults, they're kids. And they have different skeletal systems. So I feel better because I always have to show x-rays and injuries, but I didn't pull any gross videos for you and stuff. So if the injury's older and it's still painful a month after it started, get it looked at. What's the harm? We may find something that is important. We may find that it's really not much of anything and it's going to be okay. This one here, the medication, if it's required after every time they play, that's a bad sign too, I think. We'll talk about medication in a second. I'm not a big pre-medication fan. I'll tell you why in a bit. Here's a kid who had back pain for 6 months. I thought it would go away. A 12-year-old with 6 months of back pain. 5% of their life they've been in back pain. Think about it that way, you know. I thought it would, well, at what point are you going to say, well, it's not going away, you know? And you can see this black dot right here, right here, right here, right here. That's a stress fracture in their spine, okay? I had a kid who came in 2 years of back pain, 4 stress fractures in her spine. It took me 9 months in bracing and other things to at least get her back to being pain-free for day-to-day activities. Because at age 15, she waited 2 years to come in. That's tough. You know, Doc, it's been hurting for 2 years and I got a game this weekend. Okay. Never, never, never pre-medicate a kid to play. Okay? Just take some Advil and get out there. Pain is your body's signal that something's not quite right. You have to be able to read your pain reaction to an activity to determine, is this a good activity for me today or not? So I'm not a big fan of telling kids to take medicine to go out and do it. Because kids have trouble reading their discomfort. Kids want to please their parents. Kids want to please their teammates. Kids want to please their coaches. And they will fight through it for you. That's a good quality in a person. But these are kids, and we can't take that risk with them. There are other risks too. If you take anti-inflammatory medication before you play, anti-inflammatory medication is one of the number 1 side effects of stomach irritation, ulcers, bleeding, that kind of stuff. You guys have probably heard all that. When you exercise, where does the blood go? To the exercising muscles. Where does it go away from? Your digestive system. So the medicine sits in the digestive system, not getting absorbed because there's no blood flow there, which increases your risk of having the GI side effects. So that's another reason not to pre-medicate to play. But in kids, they got to know if it hurts. They got to be able to really feel if there's something going on there. It's hard enough because when you're exercising, you're excited and you know that fight or flight mentality. You've heard of that before? Your sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system and things like that. You get adrenaline pulsing through your system. You get endorphins kicking off for pain control, and you can play through pain because you don't recognize it because your body's trying to not let you recognize it. Your brain even stops communicating with the injured body part a little bit to try to allow you to. Well, why is that? Well, when you were getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger and you were on the menu, if you had a broken ankle, you still had to get away. And so your brain figured out this way to surge these chemicals through your system to allow you to do something, even though you're in pain, not recognize the pain, and still save yourself. The same response happens when you're exercising. So that's already helping these kids not figure out what's going on. To add medicine on that just doesn't help. You've heard those stories, you know, I couldn't believe the person with the broken leg, you know, trudged 45 miles through the snow carrying 3 kids to safety, or the mom with a broken arm lifted a car off the baby. Well, because all this stuff is surgeon, they can't tell they're hurting themselves. They pay afterwards though. So to recap quickly, dynamics better than static. Dynamic warm-up's a good idea. As part of a program of warm-up, I would look, especially if you're in that 14 and older age group, at the FIFA 11 Plus, which you can find on their website. Strength training is safe in kids, but it's got to be done correctly, and that's the big problem. Is that it's really got to be supervised. It really has to be monitored. There are strategies that do exist to reduce the risk of overuse injuries. One is change things up. One is let the kids do something else once in a while, and one is give them an off season. Rest is good treatment. Rest is the only proven treatment for musculoskeletal injury. All the other things we do may help to some degree, but have not been proven to be statistically beneficial. And hoping pain goes away is not a treatment strategy, okay? I have a friend who's a volleyball coach down in Muncie, Indiana. He's a great guy, very inspirational guy, and one of his favorite sayings is, hope is not a strategy. Hoping your pain goes away is not a way to treat something, okay? If it's an acute injury to the body part, get them looked at. If they can use the body part but it's still painful a week later and it was an acute injury, get them looked at. If it wasn't an acute injury but they've had pain consistently for a month, get them looked at. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? We're going to find something that we could help them with. Wow, that's not such a bad thing. But we don't want to miss something that could be a bigger problem later, okay? So that's all I got for you. I hope that was something along the lines of what you were looking for. I did bring some cards with my office information on it. If you have a kid who's hurt and you want to get a kid in with my partner or myself, have them call, identify themselves as a Troy Soccer Club kid, and we'll get them in within a couple of days as best we can. We often add kids on at the end of the day if it's an acute injury, just because, again, we don't want people to have to wait because the anxiety builds and people in pain, that's not a good thing. So just give us a call and identify yourselves, and we'll do our very best to get you in as fast as possible.
You treat over 40 soccer players?
Do I treat over 40 soccer players? Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
I'm coming to see you next Thursday.
I saw that.
Is it beneficial to do anything after a game, at the end of practice?
Yeah, a cool down or a warm down, some people call it, is beneficial as well. We were talking more about the warm up, but a warm down is beneficial too. It can be shorter than the warm up. There is some evidence that static stretching in a cool down situation actually may be okay, but generally it's going to be a decreasing intensity aerobic and light stretching, dynamic stretching program as well. But instead of a 20-minute warm-up, it would only be about a 5 to 10-minute cool down. That's a time where if somebody's had a prior injury and they seem to be doing okay, and you want to ice to preemptively stop delayed soreness from coming on, that's not cheating. That's a good time to do it as well. The post-exercise period is also the most important period to refuel these kids. We didn't talk about nutrition, but you burn your glycogen stores with exercise. The first 30 to 60 minutes after exercise is the most efficient time to replenish your glycogen stores and replenish your energy for the next exercise bout. So even though they may not feel like eating something, it's probably a good idea in that first 30 to 60 minutes. And usually the first 30, more than, that's the better time to eat something. And we're talking about carbohydrate and protein. A little bit of fat's not bad, but in about a 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio where it's mostly carbohydrate and a little bit of protein. So a half a bagel with some peanut butter on it or something of that nature to replenish the glycogen stores. It's the most efficient time to do so in that cool down period. Okay?
So, yeah, this is kind of a fun for the specialized doctors. Like I've definitely gone through with my daughter and all that. It's taking, I'll take them to her teacher because I know this place has an X-ray machine. And they'll be like, they'll touch it, be like, it's swollen, take an X-ray, and send you away. And I told my friend who's an orthopedic surgeon, she said, listen, no, I'm not saying anything. They don't know anything. They don't see the things, they don't look at things. And they also, when we actually took her to the right person, the treatment, and then when they look at it, the way they watch them walk, and everything else is totally different. I mean, they're the doctors, sports doctors are looking at the kid better, telling them stuff like, make sure you walk correctly, even with the injury, so that you're walking the right way, not overcompensating, and it's going to be over there. So all the advice that you get from a specialized, a doctor who's a sports person, is very different.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah,
2 months later, she's still hurt, and I told her to, a doctor like yourself who took care of her the right way, watched her walk, and gave her.
well, and again, that 12-year-old who sprained their ankle, much higher risk that they actually broke the growth plate on the side of the ankle than actually sprained it. Because at 12, your ligament is 6 times stronger than the bony growth plate that it attaches to on the outside. So again, they do miss things, and it's not because they're trying to miss stuff. It's just, again, if you don't have the experience, you're just not going to find it. And this is all we look at. This is all we do. So again, I can't disagree with you. Anything else?
Is there anything in the FIFA 11 that is not appropriate for 8s or 9s?
There are some pieces of it which may be a little difficult for them to perform, but it's generally pretty safe, and you can soften it down a little bit. When you look at it, you'll see the areas where you say, geez, for an 8-year-old that looks a little bit, a little bit higher than what they can probably achieve. And then what you can do is you can just back off the intensity, and it doesn't mean that you have to do the entire thing, but again, it's generally pretty safe. And what I just tend to do with the younger kids is if it's a strength move, we're not really going for big power. We're just trying to do body weight control as opposed to moving something specifically. Isometric more than isotonic. So.
When you tell people to take 3 months off from the primary sport, is that to get away from those movements? Or is it
It's to give those particular muscles and muscle groups a chance to recuperate for one. But when the muscle kind of gets used to the same thing over and over again, it finds patterns to cheat to get certain things done, and that's not necessarily beneficial for the health of the muscle or for the performance of the athlete. And to make their body work in different ways and to bring different muscles in can actually be beneficial for them as they get back to their primary sport. And I'm not talking about a 3-month single block. I'm talking about 3 months over the course of a calendar year where you have like a month in different stages, or 6 weeks here and 6 weeks there. When my daughter was playing soccer, she played for TSC for a little while, then she played for another club for a little while. And when she played for the other club, I won't mention who they are, they were a pretty good team. I mean, they made the state cup finals at 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, and 17s. They were a pretty darn good team. And the second year we were with them, the coach, we finished the season in late October. We finished the fall season, and we weren't going to start an indoor winter playing season until January. So we had all of November and all of December with nothing really competition-wise scheduled. And so at the last game, the coach got together, talked to the kids, came over, talked to us, and we all said, okay, we'll see you January 2nd. He said, well, wait a minute, it's October 30th. We got to have to practice. No, kids need a break. Kids need a break. He said, well, we can't do that. They're going to lose their skill, they're going to lose their they're going to lose their conditioning, they're going to lose this, they're going to lose that. Kids need a break, coach. They just all the parents were on board with it. So we all came back January 2nd and played. Now they were U13s at the time. They played in the U16 boys winter season, went 9-1, got scored on twice. In the calendar year, they got scored on 3 times. And we did it to the coach twice in the year, where we said, we'll see you in 2 months. The next year, he just said, I'll see you in 2 months. Because not only did the kids come back healthy,
What's the easiest way though? Is there like a great team? It's the team that is mediocre that the coach is going to push more on training.
yeah, but it's also those kids who need to be able to do other things and try to improve their skills by pulling other things in. But not only do they come back healthy, they come back wanting to play. Oh, I'm not going to tell you that.
So in today's day and age, where you've got kids playing multiple sports, a lot of those multiple sports have a lot of the same motions. So
Yeah.
soccer, and basketball, and lacrosse, I would argue, are very, very, very similar motions. There isn't, if kids want to truly play multiple sports, and I'm a big proponent, I've said this to many people, I want kids playing as many sports as possible. There is no downtime.
Well, yeah, but when you look at soccer and the style of running in soccer, girls soccer versus girls lacrosse, it's a hugely different style of running, and there's a lot more upper body in girls lacrosse than there is in soccer. And so running with your arms up here is a whole lot different than running with your arms down here. And the sprint work and the speed work and the footwork and driving a ball not happening in lacrosse. So there is a big difference there. The other part that we didn't talk about is I'm not talking about playing soccer and lacrosse and this at the same time either.
Unfortunately, in today's day and age, if you play travel soccer and you play any kind of competitive basketball or you play any other competitive sport, there's,
but that overlap,
2 sports at any given moment, not all.
yeah, that overlap does increase the risk of injury, and that's what parents have to be aware of. So when I'm talking about the old days, when you played a season here, and then you had an off season, and in that off season you swam, or you played football, or you played lacrosse, or you played baseball, or what have you. That's the best way. I had a girl in the other day who has an overuse injury. I said, well, what have you been playing? Well, I was playing basketball and lacrosse and soccer, and I was swimming. I said, all at the same time? Yeah. I said, how many exercise sessions a week did you do? How many times were you playing this sport? How many times this one? How many this time? How many this? 17 exercise sessions a week when you added all our sports together. So there are only 7 days in a week. You're doing 2+ a day. Of course your body's wearing out. But yeah, again, there's realism and there's idealism. I'd like everything to be ideal. I'd like to be perfect. That would be ideal. I'm not. That's my realism. Kids are going to play 2 things at once. Kids are going to specialize at an early age. Kids are going to get hurt. That's a realism too. Regardless of all the things we do to try to prevent it, kids will get injured playing sports. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. But we try our best to prevent it. So I got to get home. I appreciate the time. I did bring, again, some cards in case people want to have some contact information.
I will, I'll take it. Absolutely, thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll take this over there.